Why would you ever think that the vaccinated would need to be revaccinated to resolve the problems of being vaccinated? That way they can become more like the unvaccinated. This is as strange as it gets. But we're in a situation now where trying to hold up this COVID narrative is like trying to stick glue on bricks or something because it is just falling apart. One of the points that we've made mention of, and I only did this about a week ago, and I have to talk about it again, is this issue of IgG4 antibodies. And it's not my fault that invariably what happens is some other paper is found. And in this case, they were looking at anti spike IgG4 and looking at the impact of SARS-CoV-2 vaccine platforms on specific priming and immune imprinting. Again, it seems as though the scientific community has woken up and they're realizing that, you know what, we need to just do the science. Forget about the narrative, just do the science and let's see where it falls. Because the reality is that this kind of work should have been done a long time ago. I mean, I'm scrolling down to the bottom of this paper at the moment because when you look at this here, I'll come back to what it means, but this is the first evidence of a negative correlation between increased SARS-CoV-2 vaccine induced IgG4 levels and neutralizing antibody titers. Now, we have seen this kind of unusual pattern for a long time. We are now in 2026, and this research is only just starting to come to the surface. You may wonder to yourself why. And it's not because the scientific community is trying to support the narrative necessarily. Some people are. But for many researchers who have to do papers and have to produce papers and have to get their papers published through the better journals, you can't do any kind of research that is likely to get blocked or have your name sullied. And so it's simpler just not to research it, even if you have the question. And this is the kind of situation we have at the moment. So before I come back to the paper, just in case you've never heard me talk about IgG4 and you have no idea what it is, I'll explain a few basics. Your immune system is like an army. You have multiple parts, different kinds of cells that do all kinds of things. I liken macrophages, big cells, to tanks. They can eat up anything. Your lymphocytes, I think, are like the Air Force or the Navy, get far distances and specifically take out enemy cells. They kill the cells. But an important part of the immune system is your antibodies. These are like your missiles. You fire them at a distance and they hit the offending pathogen and it lights them up and it allows the immune system to eat them. And that's a critical part of how your immune system works. And that artillery is like your antibodies. So your immune system, specialized immune cells, plasma cells, they produce antibodies that are very specific to a part of a virus or a bacteria or even a fungus or even an medication that you could take, something. It's specifically targeting something. And when it binds to it, it allows the immune system to recognize that this is a problem and target it. And that's a very important part. So it's that they sometimes can destroy the target themselves, the antibodies, because they can do specific actions, but very often they indicate to the immune system have a functioning immune system. You also need to have balance. In the same way that you can bend at your elbow with your biceps, you also need to balance off the fact that you can straighten it out. And this is how everything works in balance. So, part of the immune balance is when you have antibodies that can target and destroy things, you also need antibodies that can tell the immune system, don't do anything, stand down. And the perfect example is with beekeepers who are being stung all the time. They don't want to get an over immune response. And so the immune system says, don't worry about the bee venom, stand down. And it uses a specific antibody in order to do that. And this is what it would look like. For the time being, we'll not go through all the antibodies here, but generally, these ones are the big ones first produced when you have an infection. IgA is usually at the mucosal surfaces, and it blocks infection at that point. IgE is the allergic one, but the one that is most common is IgG, and it's split into 4 different classes. 1, 2, 3, 4. For the time being, let's not concentrate on 2. And just remember, from a simplistic point of view, 1 and 3 trigger the immune system to respond, and 4 tells it to stand down. So IgG4 is your balancing thing. It's what keeps your immune system from continually overreacting if it is always exposed to a particular pathogen. And so this is why it was interesting in the context of COVID-19 and the pandemic, because one of the strangest things that we noticed was this paper came out in 2022. This very strange thing happened, an almost 4,000% increase in IgG4 after vaccination. This is the 3rd dose. It didn't really happen so much. It was there by the 2nd dose somewhat, but really kicked off by the 3rd dose. This was a red flag, because it's not that you don't have IgG4, but the levels that were being produced, it just didn't seem normal, which is why you ended up with a paper looking at the class switch. You can't see this down here, but this is 2022. So we knew that this was important. But when you raised it, it was, well, there is no evidence that this is causing a problem. Well, of course, there can't be any evidence because you didn't study it. And as I just showed you in that paper was the first time somebody was looking at it in any great detail to see whether or not it actually impacted on the immune system. So when someone says there's no evidence, just remember what they mean. They don't intend to research it so that they can give you that answer, there is no evidence. It's not because it isn't causing a problem. So the other study that was then done then showed another thing that was very important. And this one was done in 2023. And it was looking at what happened with mRNA vaccines. And what you can see here is that anything in yellow is IgG4. If someone had an infection and they had mRNA vaccination, IgG4 levels went to 9.3%. If they were mRNA vaccinated and then had an infection, it was 41.5% of the antibodies were IgG4. If they had no infection, it was 45.7%. If you compare that to someone who just normally had COVID, their level of IgG4 was 1%. So, in effect, compared to a normal immune response, with mRNA vaccination, you get 45 times higher IgG4 if there was no infection. Now, again, some people may tell you, well, there's no big deal with that. That doesn't have to be a problem. It could be okay. Maybe. But is that what you expected? Is that likely to cause us some problems in the near future? Well, what's the problem? Well, the problem is simple. At the moment, it seems that areas that are highly vaccinated, and let me be clear, I have to be specific now, because it seems to be that areas that are highly vaccinated with mRNA vaccines seem to have a problem with ongoing COVID circulation. You will be told that the whole world is having a problem with COVID circulation. It's very useful if you live in a part of the world that is low vaccinated, or even a region that is low vaccinated. It's fascinating to hear what your observations are. Are you still seeing COVID circulating? Let us know. Real world evidence sometimes is extremely valuable. So let's get back to this paper, because the paper now highlights some very important points that should have been looked at from 2022, but no, it wasn't convenient. It was inconvenient, so therefore it wasn't looked at. They hoped this would go away. It hasn't. And so here we are. So when you look at the paper, what they highlight here again is that we demonstrate the first evidence of a negative correlation between anti-S IgG4 and neutralizing antibodies, as well as antibody-dependent surrogates of FC. This is part of the antibody effective functions. Essentially, what they're saying is that for the first time, they're clearly demonstrating that the presence of IgG dampens down the immune system. It's not just there as a random, irrelevant thing. Now, what was even more fascinating was that they found that this effect was partially overcome by updated XBB 1.5 protein subunit vaccination. This is where people are breaking ranks, because this means that this is on behalf of another vaccine company, which is Novavax, which is making the protein spike. And this protein spike is injected and then it triggers an immune response. And in effect, what they are probably thinking to themselves is, hold on there. We can see that there's a problem. It's pretty obvious that, in highly mRNA vaccinated regions, they've got ongoing circulation. Well, is it that their immune system is not working so well with IgG4? Because we know that it is primarily an mRNA-related feature. They still haven't explained why. I have some thoughts, but I'll not go into it. So what they are probably thinking is, hold on, there is a market here. The vaxxed who have high IgG4, and some people have over 70% of their IgG antibodies is IgG4. Recently did that in another paper. So they are thinking, this is a problem. Maybe we can solve it by giving them a spike protein as a protein vaccine. So in effect, what they're saying is, you guys that have been mRNA vaccinated with elevated IgG4, maybe we need to use another vaccine to help you to produce better antibodies instead of IgG4. Because they realized when they looked at it here, you can see the increased IgG4 has the potential to interfere with effector immune function, antibody-dependent cellular phagocytosis, cellular cytotoxicity, complement deposition, and natural killer cell activation, implying a potentially adverse effect on some immune functions. So this is a problem. They are finally starting to say it. And therefore, they're thinking to themselves, well, we may have a solution here. Technically, revaccinate those people who are mRNA vaccinated with elevated IgG4 so that they produce less IgG4, more IgG1 and IgG3, and therefore become more like the unvaccinated, because the unvaccinated don't have this issue. Now, let me be careful here, because I'm not saying that COVID vaccines didn't work and didn't have a place. I'm not in that camp. Where I am firmly placed is that COVID vaccines should only have been given to high-risk cohorts who had not previously been infected. I cannot see any science that indicates there was anything that was better. What else is interesting is China, because China used a whole virus vaccine primarily. They did use some protein subunit vaccines as well, but primarily whole virus vaccines. Now, they didn't work particularly well in the sense of protecting against transmission, because you could see when the Omicron wave came and they had zero COVID lifted, there was a huge outbreak of COVID in China. But it seems to have largely have been one hit. The whole population gets it. Then, because they had a whole virus vaccine, which would have been multiplying the effects of not just the spike protein, but the N protein, the nucleocapsid protein, the envelope protein, the ORF proteins, they would have ended up with a broad immune response, which would have been better. There's no doubt that the natural immune response, only 21% of the targets are actually to the spike protein. The majority of the targets are to other proteins like the open reading frame proteins that are produced inside the cell. And this is primarily because the immune system, instead of using antibodies as its main targeting, it uses very specialized, almost military marine cells, CD8 killer cells. They just blow up the cell. They just kill the cell that is infected. And so that immune system and that kind of immune response is what you need to deal with COVID. All of this stuff with high levels of IgG antibodies, IgG4 antibodies, or antibodies that are only targeting the original Wuhan strain and not targeting the up-to-date one, it is no wonder that we are seeing ongoing circulation, because in effect, don't let them kid you, they're pretending that it's because of all the variants. It's not because of the variants. It's because the variants are unable to be picked up by a damaged, weak, tolerant immune system. You will not find that problem in an area that has natural immunity that is broad and targeting multiple proteins on the virus. They have messed up, but they don't want to acknowledge it. And so they will leave you to just pick up the pieces. You notice nobody's talking about it. Nobody's interested in the circulation. You're just going to have to pick up the pieces. And the reality is that the fact that a large proportion of the population has elevated IgG4, they can't neutralize this virus. And so everybody is at risk. And this is where you have to be very careful. I treat this with great respect. I don't necessarily get into the argument about the unvaxxed now having superior immunity than the vax. That probably is pretty clear from this evidence in the paper. But the reality is that your immune system is not always strong. If you are tired, if you are stressed, your immune response falls. And if you are always in an environment where you are exposed to virus, it doesn't take much for you to become infected. This is difficult times. And in the long run, I remember when Gert said this, and I think he may be right, that the safest place in the world may turn out to be Africa, because they weren't really vaccinated. They were left on their own devices and they survived pretty well. And so you'll need to be somewhere. Haiti, 2.7% vaccinated. Papua New Guinea, 4.5% vaccinated. I guarantee you. And please, if you are in any of those locations or you know someone, please just ask them, are they still having ongoing circulation of COVID? Papua New Guinea was raised at a conference, a mining conference. This is how I knew about it, where the miners who were working in Papua New Guinea said at the conference, nothing related to COVID. They said, there is no COVID problem at the present in Papua New Guinea. This was like in 2022, 23. They said it's not circulating. They have no problems whatsoever. They were only 4.5% vaccinated. That meant the majority had natural immunity. how are you going to circulate a virus that is going to be picked up by your immune system? That's the reality of where we are. Nobody's going to honestly tell you what's happening. Let's hope that eventually the science completely crashes this narrative, because your health, your family's health, your lives in the long run will be put at risk. Thank you.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.